So we told you we'd show you kind of our optimal schedule, but again, this comes with the big caveat that we follow this when we can, and that tends to be more often than not. But there are days or hours where sometimes the schedule just goes out the window, and that's okay. This should not be taken as some kind of strict guideline that you have to follow this because otherwise you won't get your children up to par where they need to be. No, no, no. And even you'll notice within the schedule, a lot of what's built into there is really things that are not going to be your typical hard education, hard academics, excuse me. We like to start the day off with worship as soon as possible. Right after breakfast is what seems to work best for our family, and get that day started with not only the actions of worship, the singing and studying a Sabbath school lesson and memorizing Bible verses and discussing things about God, but really also then binding ourselves together in a recognizable, almost ritualistic way that each day, hey, we're starting off as a team, guys. We will probably at some point throughout this day end up acting in a way that is not team-like, but we're going to try to start the day right by reminding ourselves through this process. Hey, Antonio, start off by reminding each member of the family through this process that we are a team and that God is our coach, God's our leader. We're trying to follow him. We're all trying to work together towards those common goals that we've established for our homeschool from the beginning of that school year. And then we move on into our core subjects there, and we've tried to we have found that for our family, it works best to lump the book learning in the morning. The kids are freshest. There's the least amount of squabbles. They haven't had enough time to really build up their grudges against each other throughout the day yet.
Not too tired.
Yeah, and they're not exhausted. They're not hungry. And so that's the sweet spot for us, is those couple of hours right after worship, and then try to get our instrument practices out of the way as well, because we want to try to get that time in. We know that book learning needs to happen. There are times you have to sit down at the table and learn, but we want to try to also pay attention to the psychology of our kids. When is it best for them? And we had to experiment a bit before we really found when that would work.
And that might be different for you, depending on when you're working, and, try different things until you kind of figure it out. And again, for me, I decided what is really the important stuff I really want them to do well at, because again, you look at a lot of our education system, and a lot of our kids are not very good at reading or expressing themselves or math. And to me, that's very important, especially if you're going to be a missionary. And by a missionary, I mean wherever you're at, whether that's overseas or in the US here, you're always going to want to be able to share your faith with others. And one important thing is teaching them how to express themselves well, so to be able to read well, to write well, to speak well, that's really important. Math is very important. And Bible, we will do Bible again, because again, Bible to me is the most important subject. If I can teach my kids to have that relationship with God, to depend on him as much as possible, that is never a wasted time. So we get that done in the morning. And then, instrument practice is very important for us too. And then, try to give them some time outside is important.
And I would point out that there's breaks even during that 9 to 11:30 session too. This is often one of our motivators. Hey, you've got to get this part of your math work done now. If you get it done and you take, you dawdle with it and you go really slowly and you whine and complain about it, well, fine. When you're done with that, we're going to move on into the next category. But if you finish early, if you get done really quickly, go on. You made yourself some extra time. Go have a little break there. And so that allows them to have some control over their own schedule too.
And again, I want to point out, this is mainly for Corin that I'm doing the schedule. Liam is only 7.5. He still doesn't know how to read. He's saying he's interested in it, so we'll see if he's ready. But he's a boy again, and he's very much a boy's boy. So he needs a lot of movement and action and stuff. So if he doesn't learn how to read this year, I'm not worried at all. And he will catch up with no problem again. So for him, I have him do a little bit of math. He's always involved in Bible and any kind of science stuff. We do more fun, interactive stuff. So he'll join in that. But any really long sit down times like writing and language and all that kind of stuff, I'm not worried about that for him yet.
The afternoon after lunch and their chores that are involved there then moves on into more hands-on types of things, a lot of practical type of activities. During this COVID time, especially since we couldn't do as much out and about, we found that we were doing a lot of things like subscription kits, and we'll mention a couple of them later on, where you get like a monthly box of, this is a science thing, or a woodworking thing that you can work on. And so we try to find opportunities for them to do that. And gardening has been really big for our family this year too. fact, if anybody wants tomatoes, I will email them to you by this point.
But again, that's a great time for your kids to explore some of the things they might, want to try out.
And then we mentioned also kind of that growth mindset and how, this is almost a life philosophy, not just an educational philosophy, but a life philosophy that you want your kids to learn that it's okay to fail, but that you don't need to assume you're going to fail. And that equally important, that when you do succeed, it's not because there's something magical about you and that you need to be the one who's responsible for your successes, but rather that you can learn skills that help you succeed. And that above all, you want to always be turning the glory back to God. One of the helpful seminars we saw that kind of introduces to this was by Scott Ritzema called Grow, Grow, Grow. And he does have it in a DVD that's on that link there. And then we also learned from one of the other attendees of one of the prior sessions about Big Life Journal, which is a kid-friendly journal, lots of places for drawing and so on, but it really leads them through how to keep track of the progress you've made, how to be able to look back at where you were, see where you've come to now, and when you've met failure in a particular thing you've been trying to work towards, how do you respond to it? How do you overcome?
This is something that you can teach your children now that will help them not just in school, but just throughout life. And this is based on a psychologist, Carol Dweck, and she did some research in that. And the difference is really a growth mindset is to embrace challenges, to even if you have setbacks and failures, that's okay. I'm going to get up and I'm going to try again. You think about the classic story about Thomas Edison, who tried 10,000 times with his light bulb. And people were like, well, aren't you feeling bad that you failed 10,000 times? And he said, well, no, now there's 10,000 ways I know how it will not work. So if we can give our kids that, that's a really great mindset to have. And one easy way that you guys can do that is being very conscious of how you praise your children. Kids often get the idea that being smart is something that's set at birth, and it's really not. If we can teach our children that our brain is just like a muscle, and you can develop it and grow it, and smartness is the same way, that's a really great thing. So when you praise your children, rather than telling them, you're so smart, if you can praise them for the process that they went through. For example, I saw you tried really hard at that. You worked really hard. That's something that will really help them to start internalizing that, oh, I can try again. And if you want to look more into that, look at that article there by Dweck. She did a whole study. It's really cool.
Now, we've got a few books that we have found particularly helpful. This first one here, called Call of the Wild and Free, is, really just one of the top books we would recommend for anybody who is even considering homeschooling, not only because it's so encouraging for people who are homeschooling, but because it also provides a really great summary of all the different types of homeschooling that are out there in really accessible, short, boiled down chapters or diagrams. So I'd highly recommend this one. It's available in libraries typically, and this is one that we have even given to a couple people, just like, hey, you really need to read this. This is so helpful. And it really takes a lot of the stress off of you as the parent. It's very encouraging to you, again, as we've been trying to be in this presentation, to remember you can't screw up your child. You're not going to mess them up. This is going to work for you. The perfect curriculum is whatever works for you, and it's going to be okay.
And you have a great opportunity to really connect with your kids and give them a really great childhood. So highly recommended. Every homeschooler should read this book.
Next one, this is by Ray and Dorothy Moore, which we did mention earlier, also having written that book about called Better Late Than Early in regards to when to start schooling. But this is just a really great resource handbook. The authors are Christians. They're actually Seventh-day Adventists, and they promote the three-prong approach, which is really a core of the concept of true education, which is what your child is learning is not just the academics, but also how to serve and how to have practical skills. And so this book also provides a lot of encouragement and evidence for when to really start schooling, and how the academic focus is not really the main thing or the only thing to focus on in your schooling. And this leads naturally into the other book, which is Education by Ellen White. And it does have a modern adaptation called True Education. So if you're looking for this book and you find that the older, 19th century wordage is hard for you, the version called True Education is easier to understand. But again, this focuses on the concept that, hey, our primary textbooks, when we're dealing with raising our kids to be well-rounded individuals are the Bible and nature. We're going to build their character, and we're going to turn them into well-rounded citizens for this earth and for heaven as well. This is one of 2 books that we will be mailing out to you guys that we actually just received them now ourselves yesterday. And they're fresh out from Scott Ritzema from Belt of Truth Ministries. This first book looking at kind of the history as to why our schooling system is the way it is, what are some of the agendas behind it, as well as what are some of the ways that God would have us approach schooling our kids in modern times. And then the other book called Raising the Remnant, not just for homeschoolers, but for just parents in general, especially great for parents of younger kids. When you're still in those early formative years, how are you going to intentionally approach this from an evidence-based standpoint to really instill spiritual character into your kids? Not just make them say the right things and go to church because you go to church, but how are you going to turn them into kids who really are interested in having a relationship with God?
And if you guys are more into video watching rather than reading stuff, both of these are also on video. You can look up Scott Ritzema and find them that way if you're more interested in that kind of media.
And then this book we found really helpful. It's all based on research done by the Barna Group, looking at how families manage and take control of technology and media in their homes. So if you find that you have a child or you yourself who are struggling with kind of a media addiction or just not being able to manage time well because their device is constantly sucking them off into doing other things, then this can be really a helpful way to kind of self-check, hey, where are we at right now? How do we compare to thousands of other households that have done these surveys and research projects? And what are some of the practical tips that other families have found that really help them be in control of their devices?